Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spartanburg Philharmonic's Classical Conversations. Today, we are coming to you from location at Carriage House Wines in downtown Spartanburg. We have a wonderful hotel coming up next to us, or maybe a parking deck yet to be determined. And on this table, we also have two wonderful wines, which we'll describe to you a little bit later. Joining me today, we have a special guest. Normally, Dr. Chris Van Emmen is with us to interview me, but this time I am joined by, let me check my notes. What is your name? Oh, yes, our composer in residence and general manager, Dr. Peter B.K. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I really love the Symphonie Fantastique. I'm a big fan of Rachmaninoff, but of course, I'm always a big fan of living composers, which we're going to have in concert coming up soon.
Yes, I'm so excited about this first concert. It's one that I've had highlighted on my calendar since we planned it, and it combines sort of a lot of the things that we are really going for this season.
Well, I thought we'd kick it off with the main piece on the concert, the headliner, the Symphonie Fantastique. And maybe, for the viewers who haven't seen it before, to me, this is just it's a revolutionary work in a revolutionary time. It's got sex, it's got drugs and witches and vampires. There's a dance party. It really is like the rock and roll of its time. In fact, I've got a quote here from PBS Keeping Score. At 12 years old, Berlioz discovered music. He became an accomplished flautist, picked up the guitar, and then taught himself to play drums. I mean, this guy was a rock and roller from the beginning. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the background of the piece, like when it was written, and then maybe, John, you can tell us a little bit about why it was written and kind of what's in it. And then circle it out by talking about the little surprise bit at the end there. He was born in 1803, and if you think about 1803, that's shortly after the French Revolution, first French Revolution. Napoleon's in power, Beethoven's writing his third, and famously takes that third symphony, the Eroica, and dedicates it to Napoleon and scratches it out. And he's like, I hate this guy, right? And to me, that is one of the coolest ways to, he was born in France, and that's what's going on in music, and that's what's going on politically. And we just did a Beethoven a few years ago, the Eroica. We did Beethoven Fourth last year, and that was written around the same time, right?
That's right, yes. 4, 5, and 6 written 1804, 1805, 1806 in there.
So in Beethoven's third, does he bring in trombones in the third, or is that only in the fifth?
That's in the fifth, we get the first iteration.
And when else does he do that?
The sixth, and then the ninth.
The ninth, and it's like just in one movement though, right?
Yeah, the fifth is the last movement we get trombones. The sixth is the storm movement, the fourth, and then the ninth is testing my entry exam to conducting school here. No, it's the last movement for sure. I think there's some in the other movements as well.
And then notably, of course, in the ninth, he's got the choir in there, the chorus, and bass drum and cymbals, right? What other percussion?
Bass drum, cymbals, and triangle. He has that little Turkish march thing at the end of the last movement.
Yeah, okay, and that's 1924 at that point. And so the symphony itself as a form has really only gotten about that far. And within 6 years, we have Berlioz writing for a huge orchestra, way bigger. He's got all that percussion. He's got not just trombones, but then he's got two tuba parts. I mean, they're ophicleides, but they're two tuba parts that we do now. I mean, and that's within 6 years. I mean, this is how revolutionary and imaginative this guy was. And so it's just amazing, an important piece of work that way. And also 1830 during it, and when it premiered, that was right at the height of the Second French Revolution. I heard it was well received. Do you know the reviews?
Yeah, I mean, the French, the Parisians really identified with the piece because it really spoke to kind of their experience and sort of just their oeuvre during that period for those 30 years in which Berlioz was sort of coming about and then sort of culminated with this piece in 1830. The piece is truly about obsession. So some people think it's about love, but it really is about obsession, and they're kind of different things. And the French were an obsessive culture, right? So we have the first revolution at the end of the 18th century, and then Napoleon Part 1, and then a bunch of wars, the Napoleonic Wars, and then Napoleon Part 2, And then there was some other stuff in there, and then finally sort of like this republic monarchy thing. And so over these 35 years, they were sort of on this roller coaster of obsessive about people who was in power. So it goes all the way back to the beheading of Marie Antoinette. And then they have this love affair with Napoleon, and then they hate him, and then they welcome him back with open arms, and then they hate him again. And so this obsession sort of permeates French culture. And I think the French really would have identified with sort of this notion. Some of the literature and the plays also sort of deal with this concept as well.
I mean, when you talk about obsession, there is one particular person with whom he was obsessed, and there's a story there, but then he kind of works that into the symphony itself, and which is, again, I remember when we had this conversation about this piece maybe a year ago or so, and I said, it's not really a symphony, and you laughed. He said, yes, it's a symphony, but it's also this other thing. It's this tone poem. And he actually writes a program for it and handed it out and said, here's the story behind this piece, and required it. He edited it a bunch of times over his lifetime, but he had a story there in mind. And why don't you tell us a little bit about this person for whom this piece was written?
Sure. I mean, this is a bold move for someone. So he's obsessed with this Irish actress, and keep in mind that he does not speak English, and he's also like in his late teens or early 20s when this all happens. He kind of sees her across the opera hall or something like that. Becomes obsessed with her, sort of lets her know, albeit in French. I think maybe she spoke a little French. Well,
yeah, so I'd seen a few different things where in one place he's writing her letters and she doesn't ever respond. I also saw something where he sort of keeps it to himself. He must have written letters. We must have those letters somewhere. People are saying it. I don't know. She definitely didn't speak to him.
Yeah, my understanding is that he does have genuine love for her, but you can understand where sort of this idea of obsession comes from, because he sends her all these things and she doesn't respond. And then he sort of conjures this idea of, here, I'm going to write this symphony for you. But again, like, it's a bold approach.
Right. And to be clear, she was not there for the premiere either. He told her all about it, but she was definitely ignoring him.
Yes, the kids would call this ghosting, or sort of swiping the way that you swipe when you have no interest in somebody.
Away, yeah.
Yes.
So tell us about the actual story in the symphony itself.
I do want to caution everyone, this is a dream, and it's a fantastical dream, and it is not real life. And so entering into that, it's sort of like you enter into a lucid dream in which you can see the things happening, or you can see the main character having this lucid dream. And again, the piece is about obsession. It's not really about love. At the beginning of the piece, and it's written in 5 movements, we have this main character, we can call him Berlioz, who is sort of walking through the countryside and just lonely, and, a real downer. It's probably raining on him. His clothes are disheveled, and he's just sort of a sad sack. But then all of a sudden, this idea appears to him, and it's truly present in the music. You can hear all of a sudden everything turns around, and he gets this bright idea of a woman whom he calls beloved. At the beginning, it's exciting, right? It's perfect. It's never going to go wrong. But then in the middle of the first movement, things kind of suggest a dark turn. But again, as with anything you get obsessed with, you kind of ignore all the bad things. This is never going to go wrong. It's perfect for me. It's going to be like this forever. But then all of a sudden, the second movement, which the first and the second movement go into one another, they're supposed to be attached. He all of a sudden finds himself in a dance hall, right? And so anybody who's had a lucid dream, your areas can shift wildly, right? One time you're flying, and the next time you're in your house, and then you're at a wine bar, the whole thing. So the dream shifts. He's at a ball, and you can sense that he sees her, but he can never quite get to her.
I think we've all had that dream before. Yes, you're chasing something you can't quite get
That's right,
to, yeah.
But it's a pleasant dream. Like, you want to stay in it, right? There's no hint of darkness whatsoever. And so the first 2 movements really sort of capture the beginning of something that you're really starting to enjoy. The third movement is where things begin to take a little bit of a dark turn. So he's chasing her in the second movement, can't quite get to her. And then all of a sudden in the third movement, we're in the countryside. on its face, it's two shepherds calling to one another. But really, when you dig a little deeper, you realize that he's finally in a place in which they are together. So he calls, she responds, but she's off stage. So the response is off stage. So all of it, you realize at the beginning, something is just a little off, but in his mind, they're together. And you have this really serene, beautiful, sort of simple countryside melody. It's just sort of elegant to like bask in. But over the course of it, you begin to realize that it's not quite real. And he begins to realize that it's not quite real. The tapestries begin to fall down, and you can sense some frustration building with him.
And I love that part of the call and response where she's off stage, because there's that, like you said, surrealist. Is that really her calling back, or is that his own voice being echoed? Is this weird? And like you said, it becomes uncomfortable in his own mind.
Yeah. I mean, you really have to stick with it. And it's very easy to be taken under the spell of the music of the third movement, but inevitably he introduces enough darkness to where the clouds start to roll in, and you realize that he is realizing that this is not a real thing. And in the course of researching this piece and researching obsession, I found out that the word smitten that we often use as someone is smitten with something is the same root as the word smite. And so, when you become smitten with something, eventually some type of smiting happens. And this is what happens. He realizes that the dream is not real, and he kills it. He sort of smites out the idea of her, of the obsession, at the end of the third movement, which then sort of leads us into the fun parts of the symphony.
The most fantastical parts, yeah.
That's right. So in his dream, in going into the fourth movement, all of a sudden we are at a march to the scaffold. And in his dream starts attacking him. His dream says, "You have killed this idea, you have killed our dream, and now all of a sudden we're going to bring you for execution." And this is the thing that I think the French really would understand. Because going through the revolution, we start with Marie Antoinette, she's beheaded, right? They know this scene, and they were public executions with the guillotine.
Right.
So he's speaking directly to their experience.
Yeah. They love the guillotine, yeah.
Yes. So they execute him, which is really, really cool. And he really paints it in the music,
yes.
Right?
Yeah,
and
you definitely hear it. Yeah.
As a composer, I'm sure as all music students, we all focus on this one specific moment at the end.
Exactly, yeah.
You hear his head get chopped off and then roll down the stairs.
Right.
Bum, bop, 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 right?
Yes.
And so it head into the basket, which is just sort of this fun thing that he has for us.
Yeah.
You have to know that it's there, but once you do, you can't unhear it kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a drum roll leading up to it too, right? It's a very dramatic moment.
That's right. He really sets the stage.
Right.
And the Parisians would know this sort of course of events, right? So, here it comes, right?
Yeah.
And this is also how you know it's a dream, because in the fourth movement, he's been executed, but he's standing there with his head in his arms.
Right.
And all of a sudden, he's transported to the top of a mountain for a witch's Sabbath.
Right. Yeah. And there too, like there's that fifth movement, whereas before, traditionally, there's only four movements. And so you have this moment where he's beheaded, and then it goes on. And that's also a little surprising, Oh, there's more. Okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, the story... It's the true feat of it is a symphony, but the true feat of it is that he has laid out a story and tells it to you in music, and you really don't even need the prose to understand what's going on, right? And that is a feat that has not really been done since. I mean, there's a few instances, but he started kind of the whole thing.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And so the fifth movement is a witch's Sabbath. All of a sudden, the idea, she reappears, but she's now sort of transformed into a dark, shrieking sort of head of the coven, if you will. And so the gates of hell open. We get the death chant from the Catholic Church. It all comes together, and they all sort of enter into a dance with one another, which is it's just really fun.
Yeah, right. So this piece premiered in 1830. It was pretty well received. 2 or 3 years later, he has this other performance. And finally, this Irish actress comes to hear it. She's invited by somebody else. She finally gets to, and this is the twist that I love, that she goes and hears it and says, that guy's not so bad. for some reason. And so then she agrees to meet with him, and he gets the girl. He gets the girl in the end. They get married the next year.
Yep.
So it's fascinating to me. Like he's so obsessed, and this piece is about obsession. Clearly, it doesn't. It's a dream sequence, but it also doesn't end well for her. And she still agrees to see him, and they don't speak each other's languages.
Yeah.
So they get married. It doesn't last, of course, but it is fascinating to me that he does get the girl.
Yeah, momentarily, it's one of these like red flag moments where it's like, girl, don't,
right,
like, don't do it. But it's kind of this really French story. Do you know what I mean? That burns really hot. They become kind of muses for one another, but then quickly realize that when that runs out, it runs out. Yeah.
I did see, a few different sources that one suggests that, she sees the piece or hears the piece and says, wow, he really loves me. Another is that her career wasn't doing so well. She was in debt. He's doing well. He's obsessed with her. There was another story, and again, I don't know which one of these is true, where he drugs himself and says, marry me or else, and then takes the anecdote. All of that fits well into this storyline. Any one of those.
If there were reality TV producers, then they would have this on camera, and it would be a best hit.
Yeah. So have you ever conducted this before?
I have.
Okay.
This one I know pretty well, and every time I come back to it, it just gets wilder. Actually, the deeper you go into the story, you think, how in the world is this thing? How is this written in 1830?
Right.
It would be crazy now, but in 1830 it must have just been over the top.
Well, and speaking of which, so for listeners today, what's a key takeaway from hearing a live performance, especially, but just in listening to it, what's a key takeaway since this was written nearly 200 years ago?
Yeah. So if you listen to this on a recording, you never really get to experience the visceral nature of the thing. So some of that stuff won't come across. And he puts into the score, like, basically don't play pretty here. And he really wants to lean into some grotesque things, but also have really, really beautiful things at the same time. So when you're in the concert hall, you can feel the orchestra really push the seams of what the orchestra can do and even break it at times. And it becomes sort of this wonderful journey outside of the box, if you will. And so this piece sits outside of the repertoire on its own island because it kind of broke what symphonies are supposed to do. And because it's such a visual story, you can really hear the music tell that story, which is, it's 50 minutes, but it flies by in it feels like 15. Well, that was our show today. We're going to thank Tony from Carriage House Wines for hosting us. We have 2 wines on our table today, a Chateauneuf de Pape and a Chablis. I'll be drinking the Chateauneuf de Pape at the end of the concert. And so if you'd like to join me in drinking that after the concert, check out Carriage House Wines and ask him for the John wine. The concert is September 14th at 7 p.m. in Twitchell Auditorium, and we hope to see you there. You can also find it online a couple weeks afterwards. See you there.